There is a particular kind of grief that nobody prepares you for, the grief of realizing that the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones quietly building the cage around you. We are raised to believe that marriage is a partnership, that a mother's love extends naturally to the woman her son chooses, that family is a sanctuary you can always return to no matter how hard the world gets. We carry this belief the way we carry a lantern in the dark, trusting it to show us the way home. Nobody tells you that some people will look at that lantern and see only an opportunity to burn you down. I was 29 years old when I finally understood that truth. I was standing in my own kitchen, watching my mother-in-law pour something from a small unlabeled bottle into my morning tea while she thought I was still upstairs getting dressed. She did it with such casual ease, such practiced calm, that for a moment I genuinely could not process what I was seeing. She hummed quietly to herself, rinsed the bottle under the tap, tucked it into the pocket of her cardigan, and then turned around and smiled at me as I walked into the room. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said. "I made your tea." And I smiled back. I thanked her, and I did not drink it. What my mother-in-law did not know was that 3 days earlier, I had noticed the faint metallic smell that kept appearing in my food whenever she prepared anything for me. She had been staying with us for 6 weeks by then, ever since my father-in-law passed away and left behind an estate worth just under $9 million. What she also did not know was that after the second time I got sick, truly sick, cramping and dizzy and terrified because I was 11 weeks pregnant with twins, I had gone to the hardware store and bought 2 small motion-activated cameras. One I placed inside a decorative clock on the kitchen shelf. The other I put inside a silk flower arrangement in the dining room. Both were positioned to capture the countertops, the stove, and the refrigerator clearly. I had already recorded 4 separate incidents before that morning. I had already contacted a lawyer. I had already spoken quietly to my older sister, who lived 40 minutes away and was the only person outside that house I trusted completely at that point. What I had not yet done was tell my husband. Looking back, that decision, that specific choice, to document everything before confronting anyone, was the decision that saved me. It saved my children. It may have saved my life. My husband Daniel and I had been married for 3 years when I became pregnant. We had met at a community fundraiser, fallen into the easy, rhythmical pattern of 2 people who genuinely liked each other, and gotten married in a small ceremony that his mother attended with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I noticed it then, that smile. I filed it away and told myself I was being uncharitable. My mother-in-law was a woman who had built her entire identity around her son, and I was the woman who had arrived and rearranged the furniture of his life. Some adjustment friction was natural. I extended grace. I extended patience. I extended grace again. She lived 45 minutes away, called my husband every single morning, and referred to our house, the house we had purchased together, the house my own salary had helped buy, as Daniel's home. She gave me cooking advice I had not asked for. She commented on my body with a clinical detachment that she dressed up as concern. She told me once, very sweetly, that she hoped I wasn't planning to go back to work after the baby came, because children needed their mothers present, and she would know, having raised Daniel entirely on her own values and her own time. She said this while looking directly at me in a way that made it clear she did not consider me to be the mother she was referring to. My father-in-law had been a quiet, gentle man who had spent 40 years building a real estate portfolio across 3 counties. He left behind properties, investments, and a trust structured so that the primary estate would pass to his son and his son's direct descendants. My mother-in-law received a comfortable monthly income from a separate fund he had set up. But the bulk of the estate, the house, the properties, the investment accounts totaling just under $9 million would pass to Daniel outright, and upon Daniel's death, to his children. My pregnancy, therefore, was not simply a personal event in my mother-in-law's world. It was a financial threat. It was a complication to a plan I was only beginning to understand she had already been running for years. She moved into our guest room the week after the funeral, citing grief. She cooked constantly, cleaned constantly, reorganized my kitchen cabinets with a cheerful efficiency that I was expected to receive as kindness. My husband was grieving and exhausted, and he leaned on his mother the way he always had, and I understood that. I gave space. I gave more grace. I went to my prenatal appointments alone because she always seemed to need something from Daniel right at the time I was leaving, and somehow it was always easier for him to stay behind. The first time I got sick, I thought it was morning sickness, which I had been managing reasonably well until that point. The second time, it was more violent, and I spent a night cramping badly enough that I called my OB from the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning. She told me to monitor it and come in if anything changed. By the third incident, I had already noticed the pattern. It always happened within an hour of eating or drinking something my mother-in-law had prepared for me specifically. Never from food we ordered. Never from anything I made myself. Always from her cooking, her tea, her thoughtful little trays of fruit and crackers that she would bring upstairs because she was worried about me not eating enough. I said nothing. I installed the cameras. I poured every glass of anything she handed me directly down the bathroom sink while the shower ran to mask the sound. I brought my own food to work in a locked bag. I ate at my sister's house whenever I could construct a plausible reason to be there. And I filmed her. 3 times in the kitchen. Once in the dining room when she stirred something into a glass of orange juice she had poured for me and left on the table while I was briefly in another room. On the morning I walked in and caught her at the counter with the small bottle that 5th morning, the morning that broke something permanently inside my chest. I took the glass of tea she had handed me, said thank you, and walked upstairs. I poured it out. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hands over my stomach where my daughters were growing, and I breathed very slowly and very deliberately, and I made a decision. I called my sister first. Then I called my lawyer. What happened next is the part of this story that people always react to with disbelief, and I understand why, because even now, even having lived through it, I sometimes find it difficult to hold all the pieces together and accept that they are real. My husband drove me to a routine prenatal appointment 4 days later. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that I had asked my sister to meet me there, and what was even more unusual was that I had my lawyer on standby with copies of all the camera footage. My OB had already been made aware of my concerns. She had quietly arranged for additional blood screening at my last visit. The results of that screening were waiting in a sealed folder in her office when we arrived. My husband sat in the waiting room with his phone while my doctor and I spoke privately. The substances that had been detected in my blood work were consistent with a compound used historically as an abortifacient, a substance that in concentrated doses can cause miscarriage, particularly in the first trimester. My daughters were safe. I was in the second trimester by then, and whatever my mother-in-law had been attempting had not succeeded. But the evidence of what she had been attempting was recorded in my blood work, in my medical file, and on camera. My doctor called the police from her office while I sat in the chair across from her desk and focused very hard on a framed print of sunflowers on the wall behind her head. I did not cry. I had already cried, at my sister's house, in private, the way I had done most things over the past 6 weeks. What I felt sitting in that office was not grief. It was a cold, clarifying certainty. The kind that only arrives when you have finally stopped hoping you are wrong about something. My husband was brought into the office. I watched his face move through confusion, then disbelief, then something I could only describe as a desperate reaching for an alternative explanation, as if the truth being laid in front of him were a piece of furniture he could simply walk around. He asked to see the footage. We showed him the footage. He watched his mother add something to my food or drink 5 separate times over the course of 8 days. He watched it in complete silence. Then he said, "She must have had a reason." I want you to understand the specific texture of that moment. I was sitting in my OB's office. I was 29 weeks pregnant with twins whose safety had been actively threatened by a member of my husband's family. There was documented footage. There were toxicology results. And my husband's first response was to suggest that his mother must have had a reason. My sister put her hand on my arm. My doctor quietly excused herself to give us privacy. My lawyer, who I had called on the way to the appointment and who had advised me to have someone present, texted me from the waiting room. "Are you okay?" I was not okay, but I was prepared. The police had already gone to our house by the time we left the clinic. My mother-in-law was not arrested that afternoon. These things move more slowly than they do in television dramas, but she was brought in for questioning. My sister-in-law, who lived locally and had always operated as her mother's designated second hand, arrived at the police station within the hour, loudly insisting that I had fabricated everything, that the camera footage was edited, that I was a manipulative woman trying to steal my father-in-law's estate by trapping her brother with a pregnancy that she was not even certain was real. This last point was particularly interesting to me, given that my daughter's heartbeats had been audible on the monitor in the examination room not 3 hours earlier. My husband stayed silent during most of this. That was, I came to understand, his most consistent contribution to any difficult situation, a particular quality of silence that managed to be both non-committal and damaging at the same time. He did not defend me. He did not contradict his sister. He stood in the corridor outside the station with his hands in his pockets and a look on his face that I recognized as the look he wore when his mother called during our date nights, and he picked up every single time the look of a man who had never once in his adult life chosen discomfort over convenience when the discomfort involved his family. I went home with my sister that night. I packed what I needed, took the camera drives and my copies of all documents, and I left. My husband called 4 times. I answered the 4th call. He told me he loved me, that he was in shock, that he just needed a little time to process everything. He said this in a tone that suggested he was the one who had been wronged by the situation. I told him that I understood he needed time, and that I hoped he used it well, and that I would be in contact through my lawyer. Then I hung up and I did not speak to him directly for 7 weeks. My mother-in-law was formally charged. The toxicology evidence, combined with the camera footage and the records from a pharmacy 2 towns over, where she had paid cash for a specific herbal compound, a transaction that surveillance footage eventually confirmed was her, built a case considerably stronger than she or her daughter had anticipated. Her lawyer attempted to argue that the substance was a natural supplement, that she had been trying to help with my morning sickness without knowing I was sensitive to it, that the camera footage was taken out of context. The prosecutor was unmoved. During this period, I was living at my sister's house, working remotely from her guest room, attending every prenatal appointment, and building a different kind of case quietly in the background. My father-in-law's estate attorney contacted me because the nature of the charges against my mother-in-law had triggered a clause in the trust documentation that my father-in-law, a careful man, as it turned out, had included specifically in the event of any legal action taken against a family member that could be demonstrated to harm or threaten his grandchildren. The clause effectively suspended my mother-in-law's monthly income disbursements pending resolution of the criminal case. She had, in attempting to protect her financial position, detonated it entirely. My daughters were born 11 weeks after I left that house. They arrived 4 days early, healthy and loud, in a hospital room where the only people present were my sister and my OB and a nurse whose name I will never forget because she held my hand during the hardest part and talked to me in a voice so steady and calm that I found myself matching my breathing to hers. My husband was in the waiting room. I had agreed to let him be there. I had not agreed to let him be in the room, and that boundary, small as it may seem from the outside, was the first one I had enforced in 3 years of marriage, without immediately softening it into an apology. He came in after, when I was holding both of them. He cried. It was genuine, I do not doubt that. He looked at his daughters and he cried, and he told me he was sorry, that he should have believed me sooner, that he had been a coward. I accepted the apology quietly, in the way you accept an apology, when you have already accepted that it does not change the architecture of what happened. A sorry does not rebuild a wall that someone watched being demolished and said nothing. The divorce was not contentious in the way some divorces are. My husband did not fight me. I think he understood, on some level, that any prolonged legal battle would only produce more documentation of his failure to protect me, and that this documentation would not serve him well in any forum. We divided things fairly, assisted by lawyers, and he retained appropriate access to his daughters on a schedule we both agreed to. He pays his child support. He shows up when he says he will. He is, in the context of co-parenting, a better partner than he ever was in the context of marriage, which I suspect has something to do with the fact that it now requires considerably less courage from him. My mother-in-law received a sentence that included probation and significant financial penalties, in addition to the civil suit I filed separately. Between the criminal case outcome and the trust clause her late husband had written, she lost the income she had structured her entire retirement around. My sister-in-law, who had made several statements to police that were later contradicted by evidence, faced her own separate complications. I did not pursue her beyond what was necessary. I had enough. What I built afterward is the part of this story I did not expect. I had been working in human resources for 6 years, and during the months of legal proceedings and new motherhood and the daily administrative work of dismantling one life and building another, I had started consulting privately, helping other people navigate workplace situations involving documentation, evidence, and the kind of careful, methodical record-keeping that most people only think about after they needed it and did not have it. I was good at it. I had learned, with extreme personal motivation, exactly how evidence works, what it protects, and what the absence of it costs. Within 2 years, I had enough clients to leave my salaried position. Within 3, I had a small firm with 2 employees and a waiting list. The irony of becoming someone whose professional expertise is documentation and protection is not lost on me. My mother-in-law tried to erase what I was carrying, and instead she handed me the sharpest possible education in why records matter. My daughters are 2.5 now. They are opinionated and physical and fiercely interested in each other in the way of twins who have been in conversation since before they were born. They know their father. They know my sister, who has become the kind of aunt that children write about in school essays. They know my home, which is mine in a way that no other space has ever been chosen specifically by me, organized exactly as I prefer, filled with the particular noise of people who are safe. People sometimes ask me whether I regret not confronting my mother-in-law sooner, not telling my husband the moment I suspected something, not making noise earlier. I understand the question, but I think it misunderstands what was actually happening in that house. I was not passive. I was not naive. I was a woman in a situation where raising an alarm without evidence meant being dismissed, being painted as the paranoid, manipulative daughter-in-law, being the person who destroyed a family's peace with an accusation she could not prove. The documentation was not a delay. The documentation was the strategy. The documentation was the only reason any of what followed was possible. There is a version of this story where I confronted her that first morning, or the second time I got sick, or the third. In that version, I am crying in a kitchen. My husband is looking at me with that particular expression of discomfort. His mother is composing her face into wounded innocence, and nothing changes except that she becomes more careful. The cameras are the reason that version does not exist. If you take anything from what I have shared, let it be this. When someone in your life begins making you feel like your own perceptions cannot be trusted, that is not a reason to doubt yourself. It is a reason to document. Keep records, date your notes, save your messages, know what you have before you decide how to use it. The people who benefit most from your silence are always the ones most invested in convincing you that speaking up would be unkind. I am not unkind. I am simply no longer quiet. Last Tuesday, I sat on the floor of my home office with my daughters while they built an elaborate city out of colored blocks and kept disagreeing loudly about whose tower was taller. I had just finished a call with a new client. Outside my window, the afternoon light was doing the thing it does in late spring, where it goes golden and horizontal and makes everything look like it was painted rather than real. One of my daughters handed me a green block with great ceremony, as though she was entrusting me with something important. I placed it on the tower they were arguing about. Both of them considered this for a moment. Then they both laughed and went back to building. That is what I want. When I try to explain to people what I was actually fighting for. Not the legal victory, not the financial stability, not even the formal acknowledgement that I had been right about everything. Just this. Just the specific, unremarkable, irreplaceable sound of safety. My mother-in-law wanted to take this from my daughters before they existed. She almost succeeded. She is living now with the consequences of that attempt, which are considerable and permanent. I hold no particular malice toward her. Malice requires ongoing energy that I have better uses for. But I will also not pretend that there is not some deep and settled satisfaction in knowing that the tools she handed me, the necessity of documentation, the discipline of patience, the education of watching how evidence works and what it can do, became the foundation of a professional life that will outlast every consequence she is currently experiencing. She tried to audit my future and found it empty. She was wrong. I audited hers instead and found exactly what I expected. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where the only way through was to document quietly and wait? Or perhaps you know someone who stayed silent longer than they should have because they had no proof? Leave your experience in the comments below. Every story shared here adds to something larger than any one of us. And if my story resonated with you in any way, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to Restoration Stories for more. What we build after the hardest moments is always the truest version of what we were capable of all along. You are not what was done to you. You are what you build in the space that comes after.